My bass player, he's still good. Larry, he's still doing good. So he's been me and him been ride and die for a long time now. So play ball together, basketball together, and Ronnie and I play football together. So we've been around a while. Those two been with me for, I guess, since we was knee high to grasshopper, however they say it. My name is Harry Lee Williams. My age is 70, and I am retired maintenance mechanic, multi-craft mechanic. Well, yes, I have worked in the community with kids dating all the way back to 1974. I started coaching basketball in St. Joseph Catholic School here in town, and I was coaching the 5th and 6th grade. We called them the Leprechauns since we were St. Joe Fighting Irish. And I took over for a gentleman who was one of the school teachers here in town, is Mr. Oliver. And he was sick and could not coach the kids, and they called me and I said, yeah, I'll do it. And at the time, my 2 daughters were also going to school there. And but I took over the 5th grade boys basketball team, and then eventually ended up going up to the 8th grade boys and 8th grade girls, and I was there for 10 years. That's one of the things I did that first from 1970, let's see, 1979 to about right at 90. They hired me at the high school, and I was freshman, sophomore coach at high school for about 3 years, basketball, and eventually JV coach with Bill Chumler and Larry Baldwin here in town. Now, the other thing that I did here in the community was I ran a tennis program. And I started the tennis program after I started about 74, 75. I started playing tennis and didn't know much about it. I was more of a football, baseball, basketball player. But I picked up tennis, my wife and I. And we started playing tennis. So after about 10 years, they had new courts out there and all. And wasn't but a few people using them at the time. So I decided, well, let's get some of these kids involved. And I wanted to give the kids another out, something they can do other than just basketball and baseball and football. And so I started a tennis league for the kids. Well, I couldn't get enough kids to join. So I said, well, let's just do the adults. We'll get the older people playing and let's see what happens. So we ended up with about 40 or 50 people playing, women and men playing tennis. Well, the kids saw how much the good times we were having. They decided now they want to play. Why can't we play? I said, well, I tried to get you guys together. I said, no problem. Get here Saturday morning. We'll have sign-ups. I had like 15, 20 kids. And that first year. Second year, we got up to about 30 kids, 35 kids. Well, we didn't have tennis in the high school at that time. So I started a team because I was also the vice president of Southern Illinois Tennis Association. And from Mount Vernon all the way back to Cairo. And so they said, we need to have some tournaments down there for your kids. I said, well, I'm just now getting my kids started. I said, give me a couple of years and maybe we can participate. And that's what we did. And 2 or 3 years down the road, I formed a team here in town. We traveled and played in the circuit. So that lasted about 3 or 4 years. I ended up being #1 Southern Illinois when I was 36 years old in the senior division. So so quite a few people I gave lessons to in town and played a lot of tennis. That's the other thing was baseball. I had my father-in-law and my little nephew. They had a little baseball team. They said, come and help me with the baseball team. So I went and coached baseball for a little while. So I worked in the community, I know, for a good 30 some odd years with the kids. And that's either with baseball or tennis, basketball. And if they needed me, and I was always there for them, to do. And I told them, I said I would be there for them. Well, I actually, here's how I started. Back in about 69, 1969, I wanted to to join the band in school because I know the guys were talking about joining the band. I mean, forming the band. Uh, and I thought, I'm going to go see if I can get in the band in school. Well, I went to the band room, and the teacher says, we don't have any room for drummers. And she said, you might want to try next year. So I thought, well, okay. Well, anyway, I couldn't get in. But the band was starting up, so they said, hey, come on, we want to have you audition with us. And there was three or four members at that time. This was the Soul Phonics. And that's when the Soul Phonics started, back in 69, 70. So we actually got together, four of us, and we started to form this Soul Phonics band. And so we said, well, we don't have any equipment, we don't have any money, we don't have jobs, we're just kids, So they said, what are we going to do? I said, well, I don't know if I can get some of the equipment at school. They can maybe let us use some of their equipment. So one of the guys that was already in the band, he was a drummer. He was our lead guitar player, Lee Carter. See, so he said, yeah. He said, I'll go to the band room and talk to her and see if they will let us use some of the equipment. So that's how we actually ended up with equipment. We actually borrowed the equipment from the school. Now, they had their own guitars and all. This was in 1970. So anyway, we started up this band, and we started to play for the kids around here for free. We just go to the nursing home over here by the hospital, and that was one of the first places we played. So we got to where we thought, let's see if we can't play some places and make a little bit of money. Maybe we can buy ourselves equipment. Well, Larry Woods, his brother, Larry was the bass player, and his brother, Fred Wood, he actually came to us one day and said, I'll be your manager. And we thought, well, okay, we need a manager. So he started to manage us in the band. And Fred said, I'll get you some gigs so I'll buy the equipment, you guys will get gigs, and you can pay me back as we play. We thought that's a great idea because none of us had any money. So we was doing the best we could, just getting by. So anyway, that's where we started. He started getting us a few gigs here and there, didn't pay much, but we didn't care. We would have played without any money anyway. We was just kids and we just wanted to play. And we ended up getting a few gigs. We got a little bit more equipment, a little better equipment as we played. And I was using the band equipment from the high school. And I never had any drums other than what my mother had bought me back a couple years prior to that. She bought me just a single drum that that's what I started with. And that's all I had. Well, I come in one day for practice for a rehearsal, and there's a brand new set of drums sitting there. And I'm looking at these drums, I'm looking around, and everybody's looking at me. Everybody knew that those drums were going to be there but me. So it was my surprise, I guess. So I walk in, I see these drums, and I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute. I said, what's going on here? And they said, get behind them, play those drums. So I sat down there. Well, we went through rehearsal that night, and that's the first time I really had a brand new set of drums. And I'm sitting there looking at them. Everybody's gone home after a couple hours of rehearsal, and I'm still sitting behind the drums. So I wait till everybody walked out, and I'm still playing. So Miss Woods, Larry's mother, come downstairs. We were in their basement rehearsing. And she said, Harry, let me ask you something. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, can I get you to not play during the news? And when the news go off, you can start up again. I said, yes, ma'am. So I sat behind the drums and I played air drums until it was time for the news to go off. And so I started to play again. I would have probably stayed there all night, but I kept thinking, I got to get out of here so they can their ears can get a little rest, But I sat at home and I thought about them drums, thought about them the whole time I was sitting there. I couldn't wait to get back to practice. But that's actually the way we started. And we start playing for the kids here in town. And we start playing in the surrounding area, Tennessee and Missouri and Kentucky. And we ventured off a little further. And then we got to where we were doing a tour every summer. We was out of school. We'd go up Chicago and go up to Wisconsin and Detroit. We went up Detroit, come back this way. And we did that every year for about 2 or 3 years. So, but that's the way the band actually started. We had several guys come and go, that was in the band. 2 or 3 of them went off to college, that played about 3 or 4 years with us and graduated. So they went off to college, and we'd add 2 or 3 more in the band. But I eventually got married, and I had 2 kids, my stepdaughters, and I thought, well, I gotta get some money here because I can't feed them. You know, I said, we don't have much food in the refrigerator. The guy said, well, you know, Harry said, that's okay. We'll do what we got to do, but we don't want you to quit. And I said, well, I got to get a full-time job, man. I'm telling you. So I ended up going to work and getting some skills there. I was pipe fitter welder. And I worked for about 40, altogether about 46 years. But that was my band career. And about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, we was called for a class reunion. And so they said, we need to get the Soul Phonics back together because all of us remember you guys. We were all kids, you know, when you were the only band in the area playing, blah, blah, blah. Well, we tried for a number of years to try to get the band together. Wasn't successful. But this time I said, okay, let me give everybody a call. I said, matter of fact, I'll go ahead and spring for the equipment if that's what we got to have. We started off by just kind of borrowing some of the stuff to get everybody together. And so we got everybody here, and we was able to play about 14 years ago for a reunion. And I asked the guys, I said, okay, guys, you guys want to continue to play? I said, I'll get the equipment, and I said, we'll do it. They said, oh, yeah, we do. So most of the band that was still left here, we got together and we started to play. It's about 7 of us. And we put a couple other people with the 7 that was originals, 6 that was original, and we started to play again in the area. So we've been together now for the last 14 years playing around the surrounding area. Well, my family, actually my mother was born in Philadelphia, Mississippi. She came from Philadelphia, Mississippi. My dad was down there. They weren't married, but they were together, and they moved up here to Missouri. And my dad moved to Illinois, and my mother moved to Missouri with her dad because her mother died, my grandma.
What part of Missouri?
Charleston, Missouri, and we was around the Charleston, Pinhook. I don't know if you remember the Pinhook, Missouri area. Well, they were down in Pinhook, Missouri, and moved from there over to Cunningham Bottoms here in Cairo. Now, Cunningham Bottoms, you probably heard that before. That's where the blacks all were put in one location there because it was. I think that the real estate area there was pretty cheap, and that's usually where they put the blacks in the Cunningham Bottom area. And so anybody back in the 40s and 50s, 60s, they know about the Cunningham Bottoms, you know, around here. That's where all the blacks were. But from there, from Charleston to the Cunningham Bottoms here in town, and I've been here the rest of my life. I mean, it's the whole time. So I was born here at St. Mary's Hospital. So, but that's where my family ended up here. I had 2 brothers and 5 sisters in my family. And I have 2 brothers who's passed with cancer, but all 5 of my sisters are still here with me. And one of them played professional basketball back in the 80s. She's about 6'3", and she got the height from my mother's side of the family. My mother was about 6 foot, and I had quite a few cousins that's 6'6", 6'7", but most of my sisters are all fairly from 5'10" to 6'3". But my brothers, I was the shortest one of my 2 brothers. So,
do you know where your grandparents came from?
My grandparents also, I don't know if they were I'm thinking they were from Philadelphia as well, Mississippi. I only remember them here in this area, here around Pinhook area. They were all in Pinhook, Missouri. And my grandma, she's my great-great-grandmother. She was 102. She would have been 102 if she lived another month. But she was 101. And when my 2 girls and all of us took a little picture and had a family reunion at the park, and that was back in the 80s. But they were all from Missouri and Illinois, southern Illinois area. My great-great-grandmother told me she knew of slaves. She was born in 1879, I think. And she said she wasn't a slave and there was no slaves at that time, but she knew of people who had been slaves. And I used to talk to my grandmother about what did she do? Because I know she didn't have any cell phones. She didn't have any kind of computers and nothing like that. You know, didn't even have TV. And I said, Grandma, what'd you do? And she said, well, she said, I worked on the farm and I did my chores. She said, I'd get up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, wait a minute, hold on. 4 o'clock in the morning with nothing to do, no television. She said, nope. She said, I had my chores to do. She said, I haven't done by 6 o'clock. She said, then the rest of the day is my playtime. I said, man, Grandma, I said, that's pretty good. I said, what'd you do then? She said, well, I'd walk to the mailbox about 3 miles. I said, the mailbox is 3 miles away? She said, oh, yeah, they wouldn't put mailboxes back there where we live. They put them out on the road, but they wouldn't put them back there. So she said, but I would play all the way to the mailbox and all the way back home. I said, so you'd go pick up the mail? She said, well, yeah, there weren't much mail, but I said, you'd go anyway? She said, oh, yeah, that's my playtime. I played all the way, whether I had mail or not. I said, Grandma, I'll tell you something. 6 miles a day going to the mailbox and you know it ain't going to be the mail. I said, I don't know if I want to go through that. You know, she said, oh, yeah, that was my playtime. I enjoyed that. I got to talking to her after I had gotten older because I was trying to find out more about my people. And I didn't know who really to talk to. She used to be the one that kept me and my cousin when we were young. We wasn't quite in school, you know, and she was the one who had to whip us. She'd tell us, go out there and get your switch. And she'd tell us all the time, say, quit throwing them rocks. We had just a chat road down where we live, you know. But we throw rocks anyway, him and I, because we was into sports. We was trying to get into sports. Anyway, we was young, you know. We was trying to hit it with a stick. We got where we can hit rocks pretty good with a stick. Every once in a while, we'd fire one back and hit that window. Well, Grandma would come out, and she'd say, didn't I tell you boys about throwing them rocks? I said, yes, ma'am. I said, we won't do it no more. She said, I'm telling you, don't do it no more. Well, of course, we'll wait till she gets in and say, I think she's in a chair. He said, let's go. Let's start. So he started up again. So we'll fire one back, hit the window. She come out. Go get your switch. We had to cut our own switch. I cut one that if you pull it too much, the whole thing would break. My cousin would get one. The limbs were bigger than the switch I was getting. I told him, I said, hey, man, don't give Grandma that switch. She going to wear us. He said, I want to see you get a whooping. I said, hey, you're going to get one too. Man, she would wear him out. She'd hit me 2 or 3 times and wear everything. I believe that happened more than once. I couldn't believe he was getting a switch. He was getting more limbs than a switch. But anyway, that was our childhood growing up with Grandma, and because she was keeping us all. And my wife, when I got married, I told her, I said, you know, I need to go over and talk to Grandma. I haven't seen her in a while. Well, let me back up a little bit because Grandma used to dip this Garrett snuff. I don't know if you remember that with the little metal.
Big mouth.
Yeah. So she sat in front of her spit thing there, and with her apron on, she always had a little change purse and her snuff in another pocket. And right in front of a little heater. And I thought her job was to just whip me and my cousin. That's what I thought her job was. But anyway, and I didn't know who I needed to talk to find out about all my people until I got old enough. But anyway, I would always go up there during the school year in the afternoon. I'd run up. I said, Grandma, let me get to the store to get you some Garrett snuff. I said, I need to get you some. I said, I'm probably not gonna be back over here a couple of days. And she said, oh, I'm okay. I said, no, I really need to go get you some snuff. I said, you know, she'd give me 25 cents and I'd run down the store. Snuff was 20 cents. I get a nickel. So I'd get the snuff, get a nickel worth of candy. 10 pieces of candy for a penny. Now, I got a sack full of candy when I get back. I know she could see through what I was doing. You know what I mean? But I'd always, every couple of the day or two, my candy's getting low. So I said, I got to go see Grandma. So I said, Grandma, I said, I need to get to the store and get you some more stuff. She said, honey, I got some. I said, no. I said, look now, it might be 3 or 4 days before I get back over here. Well, she'll reach down there and she'll give me that quarter. Go on. Man, I'm singing all the way to the store and all the way back with a big bag of candy. But later on, I got to where I said, I need to talk to somebody about the family because I don't know a whole lot about my mother's family and all them. And she did. So I started going over and I started sitting on the floor beside her after I get off work and talking to her. And she was telling me about all this stuff. Now, the whole time I thought, Grandma don't know anything about nothing except whipping me and my cousin. That's all I'm sure she know about. She knew about everybody. She knew about people nobody even told me about. She said, well, this is your so-and-so cousin. This is your mother's brother. He did this and this and this. And this is your grandpa. I said, man, she knows she was the one I should have been sitting down talking to years ago. Well, this was in the 70s. See, she died in 79, 77 or 78. And I was working at Union Carbide at the time. And I could not go home without going by and sitting down and just talking with her. You know, and I said to myself, I realized how important she really was and who was the smartest one in the family was her. When I was thinking it was maybe some of the others that, he was out working, doing all the different things, but it was her. And she was right there in front of me the whole time. And I didn't know until I got old enough to realize. And once you get to start sitting down, talking with them and getting used to them, she's gone. Mm-hmm. See, so I sat around, I think a lot of times, I said, man, why weren't you smart enough to sit down with Grandma years before that? Because she could have taught me quite a bit. When I was playing sports here in Cairo, we would, as you know, we came up through the years that they had all the racial tension and problems here in town, which was in the 70s, early 70s, 1969, 68. And I was playing sports at that time. And I can remember during the summer, we was trying to get home from playing baseball at night. And I lived in the projects down in Pyramid Courts. They called it then, but now they changed it to McBride, but it used to be called Pyramid Courts. And we would have these white, because we played for the White Sox, we had white baseball uniforms. At the time, all the lights were out in town, and they shot all the lights out, it's around the project, and they only let so many people in there. And of course, at night, if you're out and you want to get in at night, you got to have either you have to blink your lights or a certain whistle that you have to do so those guys let you in. Well, we would come back home at night with these white baseball uniforms on, trying to get in the project to go home. And one night they were shooting, and they were shooting over top of us. I know they wasn't trying to shoot at us, but of course, it scared us, and we crawled, and some older lady let us in her apartment. So you guys get in here, get in here. So we went in there, and I thought, man. So I was only like a couple rows from my apartment, and a couple other guys was like 2 or 3 rows from their apartment. But we're trying to get through the projects, and I'm thinking they got to know that who we are, but at night with no lights, it's almost like they was kind of sending a message, I guess. I don't know. It had to be the blacks because we was going in the project and it was coming from inside the project. But it like I said, we didn't hear, we just heard the sound is what scared us. And I imagine they might have been shooting in the air, but I don't think they were shooting at us. They with white uniforms on, they could have hit us, I'm sure. But that was one of the things my childhood coming up that I could remember. That I could remember being at home at night when they said don't sleep in the bed, lay on the floor because there was going to be some shooting tonight. So, and it was. No one really ever got killed except for one older gentleman down from us in the same. I was in a 300 row, and they found him dead in his bed one morning. So, but other than that, as I was playing basketball and baseball, football in high school, we never had any home games because nobody would come to Cairo. So I went from 1970 straight up to 1973 before I ever had a home game. I played before my home crowd of my family. Everything was played on the road. And so as we would travel on the road, the state police or the city police would not allow us to come into the city without an escort. So the police would have to meet us at the interstate with the lights on so that we can find them and see them. And the bus would pull up behind them, and they'd put a car in front of us, car behind us, and take us to the gym. And they'd say, you can get out right there at the gym. They would turn the lights off when the game's over. We go out and get on the bus. They turn the lights back on, escort us back out of town to the interstate. So we wouldn't be in their city because we were from Cairo, and that was a bad name. They didn't want to stop. We couldn't stop to eat or any of that because they would escort us in, escort us out. And we went 3 years of that, everywhere we went. And when I coached basketball, I was telling my kids, and they said, oh, coach, they cheat. That's cheating. I said, let me tell you something about cheating. I said, until you're from Cairo with no home games, going to everybody else's gym to play, you ain't got nothing coming. You have to play under those conditions. I can tell you about cheating. I said, but as long as I'm coaching, I don't hear anybody in here tell me anything about cheating. I want you doing the best you can do. I want you playing hard. And I said, I want you to be the best person you can be on this floor. That's all I'm asking for. I said, because I don't want to hear anybody on cheating. I said, I already know what's going to happen. You're 10 points down before you ever come in here. So if you think you're going to go to somebody else's gym and going to get treated fairly, you don't need to be on this team. I said, we had to go through too much to get to this point for you to come tell me I'm going to quit because they're cheating. No, that's not going to happen. But we went through that for 3 years, and we finally had a Catholic school from Cape Girardeau that came over, St. Vincent's, I think it was, and they was going to play us 2 games, and we played at our place, and that was the first time in 72 that we played at home in front of our own crowd, and the place was packed. Well, you can imagine that me being on the first 5, I'm thinking, hey man, we got a chance to show out in front of our own crowd. We couldn't wait, and we had them about 30, 40 points to about 2 or 3, and Coach took us all out and set us on the bench. So we got to let these other boys play. And I'm thinking, but coach, we hadn't played at home. We still didn't get to play, but maybe half of the game because they weren't that good. But they told us, said, no problem. We'll come back and play you all again. So you don't have to come to Cape. We'll just come back over here. So we had 2 home games that year, and which was good. Yes, I remember my mother and I was, as a matter of fact, we had to go to the store one day, and they had the project surrounded. And we walked up there, and I wasn't probably about 10 years old, so I could remember because I was 10, 11. And they had an IGA. We used to have an IGA up here about a couple blocks over. And she wanted to go to the grocery store, and she took me with her. And we got there, and I don't know if he was the lieutenant or captain or what it is, but he yelled out some cadence or something. Them guys stepped aside and let us through. And she said, ma'am, can you sign this? And she would sign some little thing he had, and we'd walk off to the store. We'd come back, and she'd look on that list and see, and them guys would step aside and let her in, because nobody in, nobody out of that project without signing in and out, because they was trying to keep everybody else out, and the ones that lived there can go in and out, but they had to sign in and out. And they were all the way around the project. I remember the day that they came, because all you could hear is boots hitting the ground. Trucks was coming in there, buddy, and they was coming out of them trucks as the truck was moving, hitting the ground, and they was falling in formation right there all the way around the project. I'm sitting there going, man, I saw a lot of stuff back then, and some of the stuff I wasn't probably supposed to see, but I wished I had it all on film. Because my sister.
What was some of the stuff that you saw?
Well, I actually saw, when I went to the United Front one day, me and my buddy, buses come in from Chicago. The Disciples and the Blackstone Rangers all come in, and they all had guns. When they was walking off the bus, they was opening up their coats. Now, this is in the middle of summer, and it was hot, and they had overcoats on hanging all the way down to their knees, and they'd open it up, and they got guns in both sides of them coats when they come off. They close them back up and walk into the United Front there, and they was all getting off the bus. Now, what confused me was that as they was getting off the bus, I'm seeing whites and blacks getting off the bus that was fighting together for our cause. So I'm saying to myself, as a kid, all the lights are out. It's dark. The black's supposed to be shooting against the whites. And you got a white guy sitting right here beside you shooting. Now, who you know to shoot at? How do you know who you're supposed to shoot at? I got a little confused on that, but because they were all coming down here because a gang, you don't have to be just black to be in a gang. You could be white, Puerto Rican, whatever else. You see what I'm saying? But we weren't used to that here in Cairo. But they all came down here to fight as a cause. And so my mother used to tell me all the time, don't you go down and get mixed up with all that. I don't want you in the middle of that. Now, you too young. You stay. I said, yeah, Mom, okay. We take off. We got to go see what's going on. So we'd go and look, As they were running through the project, the guys had different guns, and they had weapons, and they had M16s. Well, one night, the guy had a radio outside of our apartment, and I could hear them on the radio say, how in the hell did they get those guns? Those are M16s. He said, the military just got them. How in the hell did they get them? And I thought, wow, I hadn't even seen the M16. I didn't quite know what they're talking about until later, But different things like that. It wasn't, I'd never seen anybody burn anything down. And although we had the fires all around us, and we had the rallies. One of the ones I remember was when Jesse came, and I'm not sure if Sharpton was with him. I think it was just Jesse and his crew. And he had a speech down on 17th Street Church. And I think his message really was, you are somebody. You may not be rich, you may not be white, but you are somebody. So that was his theme, I think, on the whole speech. And I was sitting up in the balcony for that. So I remember that. So it was quite a bit, We went from so many things here in this town, a liquor store and a church on every other corner, everything you want right here in town, to everything start pulling out. And people having problems. Then the bridge shut down and they had problems. So people couldn't come across there. Everybody I work with, all those guys were in their 50s and 60s, man, they're all saying the same thing. We went to Cairo for everything. Everybody in Kentucky, Missouri, they came here. We had everything everybody needed, So as their childhood, they could remember, the only thing they remember was Cairo, And as a young man working over there, they told me, said, oh yeah, I was in Cairo back in the 60s, And man, back in the 50s, we used to do this and that. And then I thought, really? I said, yeah. Well, there's all kinds of stuff in Cairo. You can get whatever you want, you know. I'm thinking, well, I know I grew up there and I remember a lot of stuff, but I didn't know this was the only place that that had everything. But yeah, as a kid growing up, I can remember all that. There was a young man that was friends of my brother, my older brother, the one that I mentioned died of cancer. We called him Little June. He came home from Vietnam on a leave, and his family had moved away from Cairo, and he stayed with us because my brother and him were friends, and my mother said, "Yeah, that's fine. He can stay here." And it was a curfew in town at the time, and he was just trying to get him kind of acclimated to what's going on in the situation here in town. And he didn't. He just had his fatigues, a lot of his fatigues, and he wore it. It was during the summer, so he had a t-shirt on, white t-shirt and fatigues. I remember that, and his jump boots. And my brother and his buddies, they weren't gonna do what everybody else says do. You know, it's a curfew. You got to be off the street. Nah, they're gonna be on the street. And but they knew how to manipulate and get away from the police and all that. Well, they got out one night, and he was with them. They took off, and they caught him. See, and so when they called him, took him to the jailhouse. They say he hung himself with a t-shirt, with his own t-shirt, because he felt sorry for what he did. And they said, "Well, what did he do?" He said, "Well, he was out past curfew." Well, that's when everything kicked off. They started having the rallies, and then they started marching, and the whole works. Now, his stuff was still in our place, in my mother's our apartment there, or in the projects, and which we had to get in touch with his people and all. But that's my remembrance of this whole thing kicking off back in 68, 69, 68, 69. And so from there, it got to where they said, we're not going to go down there and patronize their stores and all that until they hire blacks. We're not going to do this. We're going to march. We're going to make sure that they don't get anything done unless they hire some of us. We want to see black faces in these stores. They said, no, we're all family oriented stores. Said we don't have to hire anybody. You know, our grandma parents hand us these stores down. We're self-owned. We're not going to do it. Well, they start going broke. Few of them hired some blacks, and they would allow people to go in and shop there. But a lot of them didn't. And so things start going downhill. It was tough for him because that was one of his best friends. But I know he joined the militant guys too because he wanted to make a difference as well as some of his other buddies and all of them got together. My mother didn't. She was one of those that I don't want you guys getting involved and blah blah blah, as a mother would, you know. But he said, my mom, I got to. This has got to stop. So, but he was shot himself. He was out past curfew, him and a couple of other guys, and a policeman shot him in the shoulder. And they was running from him, and he ended up getting home. But he said he was so weak, he was laying on the porch, he couldn't even and he didn't want Mama to know he'd been shot. So he said he was at one door, and he went around the other side of the apartment to see if the other door was open, and it wasn't, but he didn't have enough strength to do anything else, so he just knocked on the door, and she came downstairs, and he said he got enough strength up to go upstairs and go in the bathroom and start washing blood to keep her from seeing it. But he said he got weaker and weaker, and she said, I was standing outside the door, I could hear him in there, and she knocked on the door, she said, "What's going on?" She said, "Open this door." And he did, and she seen all the blood. She said, "Oh my God." She said, "Mama," he said, "Mama, I'm gonna be okay." Well, the bullet come through his shoulder, went through here and came out up here. It didn't hit any organs, but anyway, she called an ambulance, rushed him to the hospital. And next day, the policeman that shot him came in there, and he had the shell, and he threw it on the bed and said, "Nigga, I hope you die," and turned around and walked out. Well, he came home, he was telling me about that, and I told him, I said, "Man, I know, I went to school with his son, this policeman." He said, "I know him." And I said, "You know what? We need to find out a way." He's, "No, you're not doing anything. You're too young. You're not doing nothing." He said, "I'll take care of that later. Don't you worry about it." I said, "Man, he come in the hospital and told you?" He said, "Yeah." And somebody was in there that said the same thing. He said, "Yeah, he threw the shell on the bed and said, 'Nigga, I hope you die.'" You know, now over a curfew. But they weren't supposed to be out, and they were running from them. If somebody's running from you, you don't really need to shoot them. They hadn't done anything really. But yeah, he got shot one time. Now he's also lost one or two buddies in the river swimming because they wouldn't let us swim in the pool. When I was a kid, I just go down there and stand on the fence and watch all the whites swim. And there's another thing my mother told me. Said, I don't want to catch you down there standing on that fence looking. And I said, Mom, it just looks like a lot of fun. She said, don't you go down there standing and watching. I said, well, I'd go down there anyway. And I'd stand there. Boy, it looked like a lot of fun. That water in the middle of summer, all the kids swimming. We couldn't get in. They wouldn't let blacks in. And then we would go to the river and swim. And we started losing kids every year in the river, drowning. And it was one of my buddies almost drowned. He didn't drown. But my brother lost two of his buddies in the river swimming, but yeah, that was back in the 60s. See, so it was pretty tough there for a while because every year we would lose somebody in the river swimming, I didn't know it till later on. And I don't know if I should mention that, the whippings I got for swimming in the river, but I didn't know. Well, I didn't know till later on that my mother had lost both of her brothers in the river. She had two brothers and herself, and they both drowned in the river swimming. So, and I didn't know that until I knew she was really hard on me and my brother for swimming, the boy up right over me. My oldest brother, he done lost his buddies in the river. He was trying to keep us out of there. And he told me, he said, man, don't y'all go there. I said, man, we're not going to the river. First chance we get, turn it back. We'd go to the river, swim. Because we couldn't get in the pool, so we go to the river. So anyway, she would whip us. And the second time I got to whipping, I thought, man, my mother don't drink. She don't smoke. She don't go nowhere. She sits here in this house. How she know I'm in the river? I'm getting whippings when I come home. She just said, lock the door. And I know that's a whipping. I think, well, wait a minute, Mama. Don't you lie to me. Just lock that door. I get a whipping. I'm thinking, how is this happening? I don't know how she's figuring it out. Well, my older brother, since he lost his buddies and all, and he said he knew me and Alvin, my brother, was going over swimming with our buddies. And he said, I couldn't stop you, So what was happening was there was a lady, one of his buddies' mother lived close by the river. When we passed by her house, she'd tell her son, they're going to the river again, and he'd come home and tell Mama. Well, she just waited on us and prayed that we come back. And when we did, she said, lock that door. They kept telling me, my buddy said, man, Harry, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get us some lotion. We're going to lotion down so your mama won't be able to see how ashy you are and all that from swimming in the river. And said, man, you won't get no whippings. I said, man, you think that'll work? He said, yeah. I said, man, I hope so. Well, we come back all lotion down. Now we're looking good, see? We walk in the house. She said, lock that door. I said, Mama, wait a minute. She said, lock that door. I'm thinking, man. She pulled out the extension cord. So I said, okay. I can still hear that extension cord going through there. I said, that's it for me. I'm not getting in nobody's water. I don't care where it is. If it's a puddle in the street, I ain't getting in. I'm walking around it. That broke me. Well, my brother's side, they talked him into going again. I said, man, you can go. I'm not going. I'm not getting there. He went. She come back. She wore him out. Now, he got mad at me because he said, you told. I said, I didn't tell it. I didn't tell it. I don't know how she's finding out, but I didn't tell it. Well, my older brother had cancer. And my wife and I was carrying him back and forth to his treatments and all. And he didn't have much time, I guess 6 months to a year. We was going up the interstate one day. He said, hey, man, I want to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, remember the time you and Alvin getting all them whippings for swimming in the river? I said, man, I could never figure out how Mama knew. I mean, I'd come home and she just said, lock the door. I said, I don't know how she figured that out. He said, I told on you. I said, what? I was getting ready to pull the car over. He said, now, wait a minute. He said, wait a minute. He said, now, I couldn't have stopped you. There's no way I could have told you don't go to that river. You wasn't going to listen to me. He said, but I knew Mama could put something on y'all if I was going to keep you on this earth, to keep you out of that river. I said, boy, she sure did. She put it, and she said she finally got him too. And I watched him get his last whooping. And I said, well, you know what, man, I guess I ought to be thanking you. I said, because we probably would have drowned too. He said, yeah. He said, I knew she could stop you. He said, I couldn't. He said, I could tell you all day long. You weren't going to listen to me. But he said, my buddy was telling him, and he'd go home and tell Mama. So yeah, they went to the river again. So, man, I thought, wow. I went to all them years. I was getting them whippings. I didn't know what was. My uncle came after me one time because my mother didn't have a husband or anything. So she's raising all 8 of us. My uncle come after us over the. He walked over the Levy Hill there, and they all knew that was my Uncle Jake. And he had Everdale's Baptist Church down there. He was a minister there, and he worked up at Burkhart's. Well, he come up over that hill, and we was all naked, butt naked over there swimming, and he had a big old long stick, and he walked over that hill, and somebody saw him before I did. They just said, "Here comes Uncle Jake." There was 5 of us swimming, me and my brother and 3 other guys. Everybody took off running butt naked, coming up over the hill, going down in town in Cairo. We running in town, and we realized, we looked down, we ain't got no clothes on. We're like 10 years old. We got to turn around and go back. Well, they all went back, grabbed their clothes and put them on. He didn't do nothing to them. Well, me and my brother Alvin was standing there looking at them guys getting dressed and all, and we're thinking, maybe we can go get our clothes. He said, come on, get your clothes. He's standing right there beside him, and he got a stick about 6 foot long. I'm thinking, man, Uncle Jake, if you just let me get my clothes, I won't come back. He said, come on, get your clothes. Boy, I made a mad dash. He hit me about 3-4 times with that stick. I was grabbing up clothes. Alvin made him that. He hit him about 3-4 times. The rest of them boys, whooping. See, I thought, I can't hang out with these guys swimming much longer because this ain't working for me. And when Mama got me with that extension cord, that broke all that. My neighborhood was great. We had a bunch of us who liked to play baseball. We had sandlot baseball and soccer. We played basketball and out there in the project. And back then, the office, we call it the office because that's where all the administrators and everything was that took care of the projects. They had a garage downstairs that had all the lawnmowers and all the different tools and everything you needed for a yard. And you could go up and sign them in, sign them out, and you can use it for free. No problem. Just bring them back. Either at the end of the day, you bring them back, go in and sign them out again next day. They kept everything sharp. They kept everything ready to go. You just had to go in. So all the yards was fairly nice. People kept their yards pretty nice. All the kids played sandlot baseball and football and basketball. We had a great time when I was growing up. I even had a library there. Miss Severs, Carla Patton, which is Don Patton's wife, her mother was a librarian out there. And I'd come by there and she said, okay, Harry, now come on in and get you a book, so you can read. I said, yes, ma'am. And I'd get a book and I'd go in there and I'd sit down for a little while, but I'd take it out. I'm thinking, man, I got to get out and play baseball. I'd take that book home, lay it down. It wouldn't be about a week or so. She said, well, how's the book coming? I said, well, Miss Stevens doing pretty good. I'll bring it back for you. She said, well, I ain't no hurry to get it back. Now, you going to finish. I got another one for you. I said, yes, ma'am. I know I went through 3, 4, 5 books. And finally, I said, Miss Stevens, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm really not reading them books. She said, honey, I know you're not. I said, I like playing ball. But anyway, which I thought at the point in time I was getting away with it, but she pretty much knew, but she still made us put a book in her hand, She was a wonderful lady. And, but we would play out there, man. We'd play baseball, football. My childhood out there was fantastic. During the time back then, as I ventured out away from the project, I was old enough to play ball and then I had to walk all the way up to the football field and all that. The police would treat us differently. I couldn't walk through this part of the neighborhood. I had to walk on the main drag. If they caught us walking from up here at the football field down through here, they say, hey, get back out on the street there. You guys get up on the street. They made us walk on the main drag. They didn't want us walking up here because this is all white neighborhood. We couldn't walk through here. We had no business. They tell us quick, you ain't got no business in here. Get back up there. They wouldn't carry us to jail, but they'd make us go back to the main drag to walk down. So a lot of times, rather than the hassle, we just walk down the main drag. But every once in a while, if we go through the back of the school and come out down here in Washington, we can walk down this divided street out here with the trees and everything. We can walk straight all the way down and hit the main highway and then go on down the project. Now, they want us to walk out on the main drag and go around, But now I will have to say, we had the barbecue pit. There was a Dairy Hut. There was a Dairy Queen. There was different stuff that you could stop and get on your way home if you had money. Back then, you in school, you ain't got much money. You're just trying to get to the house, and we had a long walk, and there wasn't no busing, but yeah, the neighborhood changed because at one time over on that side of town, on Popular area, there was all blacks neighborhood. And then the projects downtown was the black neighborhood. This project up here was a white neighborhood, and all this was a white area. See, so we knew what areas we could and could not go in, according to the police. We should have been able to walk wherever we wanted to, but that wasn't the case. Those are some of the things that has changed. Now that I see that there's blacks all over town, and the white projects, now it's the black and white projects, as well as the one downtown. That's changed. So I saw a lot of changes over the years. You know, the very neighborhood that I couldn't even walk through, I own a home in now. See what I mean? So I had a kid come here from South Africa. Came here with a friend of mine, and he came to visit, and he said he wanted to talk to me. We sat out on the deck, and I told him about this story, about I used to could not even walk through here. He said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I'll have to say that it's still just that bad in that South Africa. I said, "Really?" He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "It's that bad in South Africa." I said, "Well, it's getting better here." He said, "Yeah, but he said, let me tell you how bad it is. If you're a black man, you walk into a nightclub, or let's say a bar. They have a line drawn across the room, and they have a tape across the floor. All blacks on one side of that tape, all whites on the other. Now, you happen to be on that line or cross that line, they're not going to wait on you. They'll tell you to get on your side of the room, and then they can wait on you. He said, that's how bad it was, South Africa. I said, wow. I said, well, we're not that bad here, but there's places I have been denied eating. Yes. Yes. We came home one night, we played down in Union City, Tennessee. Our band did, back in the 70s. 1970, I believe it was. We come home, and we play to about close to 1 o'clock in the morning. So by the time 2 hours we get home, 2, 3 o'clock, we get everything unloaded, almost 4 o'clock. We're going to go to a restaurant, see if we can get some breakfast when we go home to sleep. And it's on the weekend, so Saturday morning. So we usually play Friday night. We went down to Mark Twain's restaurant. Me and 3 of the guys, 4 of us. We walked in, we sat down. And we sat at the table, we was all talking about the night, that we had and the whole works. And one of the guys kind of laid on the table because we don't win all night. It's like 5 in the morning now, 5:30. So the girl passed by our tables 2 or 3 times. White couple come over beside us, sat down to eat. They got their food. We're still sitting there talking. Somebody said, "Wait a minute. They haven't waited on us yet." So I said, "Excuse me, ma'am." I said, "You haven't taken our order." She said, "I'm not going to. You guys are not welcome here. You might well get up and get out. My boss told me I don't have to give y'all nothing." Well, we got up, went out to Glenn's restaurant, which is outside of town, north of town right here. And we went in there, and we sat down, same thing. She just kept passing by us, and finally she walked over the table, and one of my buddies, the one I was just telling you about, Charles Green, the one with the bungos in his hand, he laid on the table because he likes to drink a little Boone Farm, So he laid on the table, but the rest of us still sitting there talking. She said, "Y'all might as well leave because I'm not going to wait on you." And he said, "I'm sick of this crap," And he jumped up, to what did she say? I said, hey, come on, man. She said, "That's it. I'm calling the police." I said, "Ma'am, please don't call the police. We're leaving. We're leaving right now." Don't know. I said, "Man, shut up." Well, the guy you started the group was a guitar player, rhythm guitar player. LC, he grabbed him and says, "Come on out." And he grabbed him and took him outside. And boy, he was raising hell and he was cussing the whole works. And he slapped him inside the face and said, "You're going to get us arrested. You cut that out." I said, "Hey, man, let's get in the car, get out of here." I said, "Please call the police." Well, we left. Next day, I went by his house. He laid in bed, his jaw was swollen. And he said, "Harry, which one of y'all hit me last night?" I said, "Man, I didn't hit you." I said, "But you was going to get us arrested in the restaurant." I said, that girl said she wasn't going to wait on us again. And you jumped up, and he said, "All I know is somebody hit me." I said, "Well, it wasn't me." Well, LC comes in the house, and he's still laying in bed, see? And he said, "What's wrong with him?" He said, "I want to know which one of y'all hit me." He said, "I did." He said, "You hit me too hard." He said, "Look at this." And his jaw was full. He said, "Well, you was getting ready to get us all arrested." He said, "Man, we all could have been in jail. You didn't know what you did." He said, "Man, all I know is somebody hit me." He said, I said, "Well, you jumped up and started raising hell with that girl and cussing and everything else. Man, she's getting ready to call the police. We had to get you out of there. Boy, he was still mad, but I told him, he looked at me, I said, I'm telling you, I didn't hit you. LC said, I hit you. I did it, But yeah, I tell my grandkids, you know, now they're 20, one of them's 29, the other's 32, 33. And I tell them about that story. They get sad, want to cry and everything. Well, they would. I said, look. It's okay. I said, you go through history and you go through a lot of stuff in life. I said, you learn from it. That's what you do. I said, now my uncles, all of them, they used to tell me all the time, now, boy, if they stop you, don't you say nothing. Don't you have nothing to say to them people. You hear me? You pay attention to what they're saying. Don't you do nothing. I said, man, I got rights. I'm just telling you right now, don't you be saying nothing to them folks. See, they were from the old school. See, and they always did try to get me geared up to not to get in the middle. I mean, I wasn't a hothead or nothing, but I thought I had rights where if I tell him what my rights are, perhaps I'll get my way. I didn't know I was a young man, 17, 18 years old, but boy, they used to school me all the time. Don't you say nothing, Well, that night, I didn't say anything to her. I just told the ma'am, excuse me. I said, we'll leave it. You don't have to worry about it. Don't call the police. We'll leave it, But, that's just some of the things I did. Now, as far as what I went through, being stopped on the strip, on the road and all that, I've had some, man, I was working over Union Carbide. I had a brand new Dodge Diplomat I bought. I was going through town over in Barlow. I was behind an old lady, and I was trying to get around. I was speeding. There was no doubt about it. But I got behind her, and I couldn't get around her because I was going over hills around. So I'm running 50 and a 55. And I'm thinking, man, I'm in a hurry. I got to get to work, I can't get around this lady. Well, the guy comes by me, puts lights on, come back. I said, man, he can't pull that old lady over. She's not even doing 55. Well, he pulls up behind me. He pulls me over when I got to town, about a mile or two up the road. So I pull over. I'm thinking, well, he pulling me over. I must have a light or something out. So I get out of the car, and I go back, and I'm looking, and he's sitting behind me. And he said, hey, boy, you stay right there. Don't you move. I said, well, what's the problem? I said, I don't want you to move. You stand right there. I thought, okay. I put my hand where he can see me. He walked over to me. He said, open that trunk. Let me see what you got in the car. I said, what are you looking for? He said, you open the trunk. Let me see what you got in that car. I said, I want to know what you're looking for. Well, he got on his knees and looked up underneath my car. And he looked at me. He said, give me your license, boy. Just like I said. So I handed it to him. He go back. He said, don't you go nowhere. I said, man, I'm standing right here. He go and get in the car. He radio everything in. He come back. He said, you going to open that trunk? Let me see. I said, I'm not opening the trunk, sir, until you tell me you got a search warrant or you can tell me what you're looking for or what's going on. I said, I don't even know why you stopped me. He said, I got you for speeding back there. And I wanted to say, I'm behind this old lady trying to get around her when he passed by me. And I thought, now, do I argue with this man? So I said, okay. He said, if you come back through here again speeding, I'm going to run your butt in. You hear me, boy? I said, yeah, man, I hear you. I hear you. I put my hand out to get my license back. He put it in my hand, and he got to looking around the car and looking the car over. I guess a young black man with a brand new car, that's... No. See what I'm saying? So I got to work. I was so mad. I was crying mad. I called my wife. I said, I'm going to jail tonight. She said, what are you talking about? I said, well, if I run across that boy just stopped me earlier, I said, I'm going to end up going to jail. I said, I'm not going to take it the next time. She said, honey, he did all he could to provoke you, to get you to do something wrong. And you did great. You didn't do nothing. Said, please don't say nothing to them folks. I said, look, I can't take it again. I can't do it. I did it once, but I can't do it no more. She said, trust me, don't do anything to them people. Don't say anything. See, all my life, going through different things in this area, a lot of the guys, when I grow up, I start doing the same thing too. I start telling them, look, guys, you got to watch what you say. You got to make sure you stay, because you can't say anything to anybody because you don't know what that person you're talking to, what kind of mentality he has, But I had different things. Like one guy stopped me. He said, you got a job? I said, why'd you stop me? He said, you're speeding back there. I said, no, I was doing 45. He said, that's a 35. I said, oh, well, I was speeding. I said, you're right. He said, you got a job? I said, what's that got to do with me speeding? He said, where you work? I want to know why that has anything to do with me speeding. He said, give me your license. I did. Remember, I don't know if you know James Dumas. He's over the State Farm. He's the agent over the State Farm here in town. Him and I play golf together. We was going to play golf. This happened, I guess, about 15, 20 years ago. was over in Sykes, Missouri. Anyway, he said, give me your insurance card. I said, well, hold on. I was reaching, around, trying to see it. I said, hey, I guess it's looking at Love James. James says, well, I know he's got it because he said, I'm his agent. The other police walked around the car and he looked in there and he said, you what? He said, I'm his agent. He's got insurance. I know he has. And he was my agent. And he said, yeah, right. Well, James reached in his pocket, pulled it out, gave his credentials. He looked at it. He said, by God, he is his agent. I said, yeah. He said, I know he's got insurance. I said, look in that little black case in there, James. He did. And he pulled my card out and I handed it to him. They went back. They came back. They said, how long you been working? You say you work where you work? And I said, sir, I don't understand what this has got to do. Will you write my ticket? I said, you said I was speeding? Just give me my ticket and let's go. He said, no. He said, I want to know, you tell me where you work at. So I finally had to tell him where I worked, how long I worked there before he would let us go. When we went into the golf place there, which we actually, I want to say 200 yards from the golf place. We walked in there and we told the guy that owned the place what happened. He said, oh my God, not again. He said, they're going to run all my business off. He said, I'm going to tell you what, y'all not paying for golf today. Y'all just play all you want to play. He said, I got your golf today. He said, I got to call that chief. He said, this has got to stop. He said, they sat down there in that little place and I get people come from other places here and they come down that long stretch and people think because there's no houses, nothing there, it's probably 45 or 55 miles an hour. And he said, it's 35 when you first turn on it and there's a bunch of houses, but it doesn't change. So when you get down there about 2 miles, you still supposed to be doing 35, even though there's nothing there. See what I'm saying? So I saw the police pull in there because we've been there before and seen them parked there. And James told me, he said, Harry, what are you doing? He said, police up here. I said, yeah, I'm just doing 45. He said, okay. Well, we thought there was 45, and he said that they was kind of running a little thing there where they set up back in that little corner because they know people don't live there or start speeding up after they get down there away from all the residential areas. But it's still 35 and you don't know it. So they was getting people tickets,
Collecting money.
Oh yeah, collecting money.
In school.
Well, we had a little place called Nick's Barbershop that we would have. He had a wooden floor and he was the barber there. Nick was a pretty good sized guy. He was about 6'6", 6'7", probably weighed about 300 some odd pounds. And he would cut our hair, for all events, whether we haven't taken pictures in school or whatever else. Well, he also would open up his place at night, have a jukebox, and we all play music and we all dance. So we all went to Nick's place. I wasn't very, very old, I guess 10, 11, 12 years old. But anyway, that's where we would go. That's where we hang out, right there. And when I got my hair cut, I'd go in and he said, how you want it, boy? Like that, he looked down at you. Of course, now he's tiring way up there. I was a young kid. And I said, well, I wanted a little bit off the sides and I want it kind of flat top with a little part, He said, yeah, okay. He cut it all off. And then he'd slap you with that brush, pop that apron, next. You look in the mirror and you think, what are you going to do? A guy 6'6", 6'7", 300 pounds? You can't say anything. So the next time I go, he said, how you want it? I said, leave me a little bit on top. I want a flat top, and you can go ahead and get the sides, but leave me the top. Okay, put it on there, cut it all off. Thinking, man, we got to get somebody else around here to cut hair. This guy. But we went through that, I know, 2-3 years. But that was our place we hung out. Other than that, I would try to I picked cotton, but I would sneak on the bus because I wasn't old enough. 13, 14 years old. You had to be, I think it was 17, 18. But I was about 14. I sneak on the bus. And they said, Harry, get in between us. So when you start walking up on the bus, he won't pick you out. I've been denied once or twice. He said, you too young, I think you're making money. But I could go to the movies for 75 cents and 35 cents get in the movies, box of popcorn, box of Milk Duds, and a Coca-Cola. I'm done. I'm out. But that's all I can't take no girl with me, but I can do that for myself. You see what I'm saying? So I get on the bus and I pick a 75-pound bag of cotton for a penny a pound. I got my 75 cents. I can go to the movies. That's all I was picking cotton for, so I can go to the movies. Well, I'd pick that. Sometimes it'd be hot, and I'd get up there, and I got my bag I thought full, and he'd get in it and push it all down. He said, boy, get back out there. You ain't done yet. I said, man, what'd you do to my cotton? He said, look, you ain't done yet. Of course, if you don't pack it, you don't get 75 because it's kind of fluffy. So you're down to like 50, 60. That means no milk duds or popcorn, maybe get in the movies and a Coke, and that's it. So I'm thinking, yeah, I got to get back out. So I'd go out and do what I could to get that whole bag because I got to get that 75 cents. So that was some of the things that, the men, dentists, and all those, we'd go to the movies, we'd go to pick cotton, and we eventually went to different other fields, strawberry and cabbage and different things we picked. But that's what we did as kids around here to make a little bit of money, Yeah, we started regular yards later and that type of deal. But yeah, we had a good time just playing ball out there in the project as kids, and that's what we did, My situation was a little bit different than some of the people because I married, out of my race. And so, but me being an athlete, see, I ended up playing basketball and football. I was running back, number one running back, football in town, in the school. Baseball, I actually got a scholarship to play baseball at Charlie College because I was a good baseball player. And basketball was probably my worst sport, but yet I still started, and all. And I walked on at Shawnee and made the basketball team. So everybody knew me. I was accepted by a lot of people because they knew I did a lot of sports in town. Yet there's some always not going to accept you. So my wife and I got married at 18 years old, see, and I was young. And my older brother stood up with me. Matter of fact, he did it right before we went down to Union City, Tennessee to play in a gig one night. And her girlfriend, they stood up with us. And the preacher, he was Reverend Cobb. I don't know if you know Reverend Cobb. He's gone now, but he knew my mother. And we went into his house, and I got married at his house right before we left. He looked at my brother. He said, "Your mama know about this?" he said, "Yes, sir." He's about 5 years older than me, so 6. Anyway, he married us and all. But I had all of my friends growing up as an adult. They were still my friends. All the guys were, and a lot of the girls that didn't really care much for me all gravitated toward me after I got married to her, trying to cause problems. She had a hell of a time. All the girls she couldn't even go to the grocery store. They spit on her. They would push her out of line. They do all kinds of stuff to her. She caught hell. And so that just kind of pushed us both closer together. So my friends that stayed my friends, they would do what they could. But, I just told them, I said, look, we just got to take care of each other, lean on each other, that type of deal. There was a lot, like I said, a lot of people that knew me. I didn't know them because I played a lot of sports. And I think that's really what helped us get over the hump. Now, the guy that was selling me this house, he won't sell it to me. I lived down the street here. The house burned down, and I redid that house first. When we had an apartment, and then we had one of those Keys homes for a year or so. I found out that I couldn't own it. I don't care how long you pay for it. It's one of those deals where you sign up on it, and you think, hey, I'll have this thing paid for, and they said 20 some odd years, but they said, no, you really never pay for it. If you want to get rid of it, you can't sell it, just give it back to them. And I thought, well, that ain't gonna work for me. Mm-hmm. So I said, I got to find something else. So the house down the street there, we bought it from Calvin Watson, the Cadillac dealership. And he knew her parents. So they ended up selling us the house. Of course, I didn't think anybody else around here would, but because he knew her parents, he said, yeah, tell them kids I got a house, they can have this house over here by me. And we went and looked at it. There'd been a fire in it and all that, and needed a lot of work. And I said, okay, well, we'll do what we can do. And I said, how much you want for it? And he said, don't worry about that. He said, we'll take care of that later. You kids go and move in, do what you can. He's trying to help us out. So we moved in there, and her daddy, he's pretty good with his hands too, carpentry work and all that. And him and I worked on that house day and night, getting it ready. And our 2 girls at the time was 3 and 7. And so I wanted them to have a nice place and when they come live with us, because at one time they were living with her parents. Because when we first got married, their daddy said, oh, no way. They're not living with them, But finally, I got sat down talking to him and the whole works and trying to get him on board with the kids and all of us. And I told him, I said, okay, that's fine. They don't have to live with us. I'm good with it. They can just stay with her parents. And when we bought that house over there, got it all fixed up and got them a room fixed up. And they was coming staying with us weekends and stuff like that. Finally, she says, I got custody of these kids. They staying with us. I said, now, wait a minute now. Let's not start no. She said, no. He's just going to have to go through the court system and do what he got to do. So he decided he didn't want to get no lawyer and pay a bunch of money to fight over the kids. So he let us, we took care of the kids for about 2 or 3 years. They stayed, they lived with us. And finally he realized everything was going good with the kids and all that. We got him in St. Joe's school and got him, where he came over with him. I sat down and me and him got along pretty good. And he started coming, oh, I'm going to come pick the girls up. We're going to do this. I said, okay, that's fine, no problem. I told him, I said, anytime you want to come pick them up, you come pick them up. If we're going on vacation and you got a vacation, we'll cancel our vacation, you take kids. You come get them anytime you want to. Never showed up. I sat there with those kids in my lap. They'd fall asleep. They'd wake up. I'd put them in bed. They're all dressed and ready to go. He never showed up. What happened to Dad? I said, well, don't. He got busy, honey. I kept making excuses for him. My wife says, quit making excuses for him. He's no good. You know it. I said, listen, but the kids don't need to know that. Let them decide for themselves as they get older. Right now, I just got to keep their heart in place. I said, I got to be here for them. I ain't worried about what he wants, what he's doing. I said, I know he's not coming. Every time he calls, he don't show up, Then he got to, when the kids got older, I told my wife, I said, when they get of age, they turn 18, they make up their own mind. But I'm not going to be between him and them kids. I'm going to let him do it. And buddy, I was all they knew. He can come around. They start denying him. He said, well, I don't want to. Well, Dad, I don't know. We got this and that. Well, see, then he's upset. And I'm thinking, he made that bed, But we end up coming down here to this house later on to buy this house. And the realtor told me, he said, well, son, I don't know. I don't think you can afford this. I said, yeah. I said, well, how much you want for it? I said, you haven't told me what the price is. He said, can I look at it? He said, well, yeah, I'll show it to you, And I knew then, I thought the way he sounded, it's like, I can't buy this house. Well, it was right down the street from the other house I had. I'm already in the neighborhood of what I'm thinking. This house has been empty for about 5 years. So we go in and look at it. My wife says, oh, I want this house. I want this house. That's okay. I said, okay, what's your price on it? Nah, he said, I can't. I got another buyer for it. I said, oh, you have? He said, yeah. So you mean to tell it's already sold? I'm thinking, you don't show me the house is already sold? And he said, yeah. He said, I already got a buyer for it. I said, okay. Well, I go home. I told her, I said, well, I think he said he's already got it sold. She said he has. She said, let me call somebody. So she had some friends, that she could call. And they said, that's Satterfield. Said, ain't nobody going to buy that house. And I said, well, I called him back up. I said, sir, what you got to have for it? And he said, well, you make an offer. So I made an offer. He said, oh, no, that's not enough. Well, one day I come home from work. The guy that owned the house, Mr. Johnson's son, he's a lawyer from Peoria. He was here. He said, I didn't know my mom and dad's house was in bad shape. I'm so-and-so, so-and-so. And he said, I've been out here working on the porch trying to patch some of these places here. And I said, yeah. I said, well, I was interested in buying it. I said, but your realtor won't sell it to me. He said, well, this time's almost up. I said, what do you mean he won't sell it? He told me he couldn't sell it. I said, well, I offered. I made an offer on it. He said, you did? He said, yeah. He said, well, what'd you offer? And I told him. He said, well, if he don't sell it, he said, I'll give you a call. He said, you got a number or something? I said, yes, sir. I gave him my name and number and all. And he was looking for a tape measure. And I said, here. I mean, I carry one with me all the time. I got a bunch of them in my toolbox at work. I just gave him. I said, keep it. He said, oh, I'll get back to you in a little. I said, no, just keep it. I got plenty of them. I walked off. One night he called me up. He said, Mr. Williams? I said, yes, sir. I said, who's this? He said, this is Mr. Johnson. He said, I'm going to let you have that house and what you offered. So I said, somebody's playing with me. I don't know who it is. I said, who is this? He said, Mr. Johnson. He said, you remember you gave me that tape down there on my porch when I was working on it? Then I knew it was him. I said, oh, yeah. He said, I'm going to let you have that house and what you offered. I said, man, let me get you some earnest money. He said, when do I need to get it to you? And he said, you don't need to get me no earnest money. He said, let me tell you something, Mr. Williams. You remember this. A man is only good as what his word is. If his word's no good, he's no good. You got my word, you got the house. I said, okay. Yes, sir. I said, how do I get the key? He said, I'll be calling him and he'll be bringing it to you. Well, here comes the realtor to my house to hand me the key. Now, that had to be tough. He put that key in my hand and he said, you ain't here to last this because I got a buyer for that house. So I took the key and I said, well, whatever. So I shut the door. I told my wife, I said, hey, let's go down. He told me we can work on it, get it ready and all that. Don't worry about nothing. Just go ahead and start working on it so we can move into it. We started working on the house, getting it all cleaned up and all that, getting the whole work. He knocks on the door one day. He said, come to let you know that I got a buyer for this house. You don't have this house yet. I said, hey, man, hold on a minute. So I shut the door and left him on the porch. I called Mr. Johnson. I said, Mr. Johnson, I said, didn't you tell me I had that house? And he said, yes, sir. I said, well, the realtor's over here. He told me he's going to sell it to somebody else. He said, I'll call you back in a minute. He brought me the second key that he had. And he said, well, I'll tell you one thing. And I went slam, just like that, and just slammed the door. He didn't get the same thing. My wife said, who was that? I said, that's Satterfield. He's still telling us we ain't got the house. She said, well, I thought Mr. I said, listen, I got the second key. He don't have any keys now. We ain't got to worry about him. That's how we end up with the house. We bought the house, been paid for. We done all the work to it. Been here since 70, 79. Yeah. See, so, but the people in the neighborhood, I didn't realize when I started working on the house, because it was, like I said, need a lot of work. This guy over here was on the board at the hospital. He's 86, 87 years old. He'd come out here every day, and he'd walk and he'd stand and look at me. I'd be up on putting the roof on, you know. I put 2 roofs on his house. And he'd looking at me, you know, and he'd make a face and turn and walk off. Or every day, same thing. He'd come out and he'd look to see what I was doing. I'd wave at him, he'd make a face and walk off. I told my wife, I said, I can't think of his name over there. I said, boy, he won't speak to me. She said, would you leave that old man alone? I said, listen, I'm minding my own business in my own house. I said, he's the one coming out there, you know, making these faces. Yeah, well, the lady around here, Hodges, her son and I played football in high school together. She sent him around here. He knocked on the door one day and he said, Harry, he said, can I talk to you? I said, yeah, man, what's up? He said, well, I'm prepared to offer you money for this house. He said, if you would just take $6,000 and just walk away, he said, we'll take over whatever you got and I'll just put $6,000 in your pocket. Now, this is 79 now. I'm thinking, ooh. I said, hold on a minute. So I go in, I said, honey, you want to sell this house? I said, we can go back to our old house down here. I said, $6,000. She said, no, I want this house. I go out, I said, Philip, it's not for sale, man. He said, I'm prepared to give you $7,000 for it. I said, 7. I said, hold on a minute. So I go back in. I said, do you really want this house? I said, $7,000. Now we can put that toward the kids' tuition and all that, you know, for college, the whole work. We can put that money up. She said, I want this house. No, it's not for sale. I said, Philip, house not for sale. He said, well, I'm prepared to give you a look. I said, look, you don't understand what I'm saying. It's not for sale. Well, when he left off the porch, he said, well, okay. He walked back around. I thought, why did he come and ask me in the first place? And I realized his daddy and his mama wouldn't speak to us across the fence. They wouldn't have anything to do with us. You know, and I'm thinking, well, okay, that's fine. So I brought a bunch of dirt in. I started fixing everything up, cutting all those trees back here down, started fixing the house. We painted the house, done a bunch of stuff, put a new roof on. I put my fence up around the house. I thought I better put a fence up down through here because I believe I need to keep my stuff in, you know, and that type of deal. They were looking at me. Well, she started walking around the block. I'd be out there in the yard. You know, my wife would tell me where to put the flowers, but I would water them and pull the weeds and all that, cut the grass. And they'd walk by here and the daughter, and I'd say, how y'all doing? And they turn their head the other way and they keep on walking. Next time they come through, how y'all doing? They turn their head and keep on walking. So I got to where I said, well, there ain't no sense me speaking to them. They ain't gonna ever speak. So I just kept on working one day and I was all bent over and they said, Mr. Williams? I stood up and turned around and looked. I said, yeah. They said, you know what? Said the rest of us gonna have to get on the stick. You've got the best yard in the neighborhood. I said, well, thank you. They said, yeah. I said, you really got this place looking good. The old man over here, he said, hey, Mr. Williams. Now he's on the board at the hospital with my buddy. He was white, but he was my buddy, and he didn't know he was my buddy. He told him, said, somebody need to shoot that nigga over there, you know, that's married to that white girl. You know, he was the one coming out, seeing her today. He said, man, I need to tell you about the neighbor. What he said in the meeting the other night at the hospital. I said, what's that? He told me, I said, look, I ain't worried about him. I know. He said, I just want to let you know, though, watch him. You just got to keep, I said, oh, I don't mind. You'll be all right. You'll be all right. You know, I said, all he does is come out and look at me anyway. He said, yeah, but man, that dude's got a lot of money, so you don't ever know what. I said, well, all of a sudden he come out one day, he said, Mr. Williams. I said, now what does he want? I said, yeah. He said, can I talk to you a minute, sir? Call me sir. I'm on the house there, so I get down the ladder, go over there, and I said, yeah. He said, I got a garden behind my house here. He said, got radish and tomatoes and lettuce and all that. He said, if you and your wife would like to have any of this back here, you're welcome to it. Gibson, that's his name. I said, well, thank you, Mr. Gibson. I said, I appreciate that. I said, we'll make a salary every once in a while. I said, be nice. He said, yeah. He said, you can have anything back here you want, sir. Son, I said, okay. He turned around and walked off. Now, he died about 3-4 months later. But I told my wife, I went and I said, you got to sit down. She said, you didn't mess with him again. I said, no, just sit down. Just sit down. I didn't do nothing to him. She said, he said we can get in his garden and take, not Gibson, the guy that's, I said, yeah. He said, we can. Well, see, it all goes back to with my grandmother, my great-grandmother, when I was sitting down beside her talking to her all the time, she said, you can cure anything with honey. She used to tell me all the time. And it finally hit me that, you don't have to be as mean as the guy that's being mean to you. Sometimes you turn the other cheek and go the other way, and it'll send a message. I would say back all the guys that were white that I associated with, and some of the other guys I didn't associate with, when we was in high school, we all got along fine. See, the high school, we had no problems. The kids didn't. It was the town itself. So we just had to be careful when you went out in town and you ran across the other race. But as far as the people that, all the kids and everything in school that we were with, playing ball with and all that, we all got along great. No problem. So as far as the town itself, we leaned on each other. All the kids did. All the ball players and all that, we helped each other. I know one kid that I played ball with, he was walking home one day, and the guy was kicking him in the butt. He just kept walking. He wouldn't even turn around. And I saw him. I ran up. I said, hey, man, what you doing? He said, well, he's white boy. I'm going to whoop him. I said, no, you're not. No, you're not touching him. Leave him alone. And his brother was with him, and he's going to whoop both of them. And they never turned around. He was kicking them, and they kept walking. And finally, he said, you know him? I said, yes, I know him. I said, you leave him alone. He said, all right, man, if you know him. He turned around and walked off. Well, 25 years so later, he told me, he said, I'll never forget what you did for me and my brother. I said, what did I do? He said, remember that guy attacked us that time on the way home from school? You stopped him. I said, well, that didn't make no sense. I said, man, we had to take care of each other, and that's what we did even when we got older. If there was problems, we all still leaned on each other, the ones that knew each other from school. I think that was the glue in this whole situation, was the kids back then growing up together, staying together, working together, that kind of changed this community. Since I worked basically in Kentucky for years and years, I didn't really work. I knew I had a job here at the grocery store, sacking groceries, but it was because I was in sports. As far as people being hired in town, if most of the businesses, what caused a lot of problems anyway, they wasn't going to hire any blacks. So you didn't get a chance to work here, and you had to go. Now, Burkhardt hired some blacks. They was one of the only companies in town at that time. We might have had 2 or 3 that would hire blacks. Other than that, you had to go out of town to get a job. You weren't going to get a job here. Kids and all that. I don't know about anybody else, but I knew enough people from sports and all that they would have me come to their house. Well, come to my house, break my leaves for me, and I'll give you a few dollars, that type of deal. And my coach would have me and my buddy, 2 of the guys on the team, come to his house, and that's just to put a few dollars in our pocket. I can't tell you how bad the economy was. How bad employment was for all blacks here in town, or what we had to do. But because like I said, once I got of age, and after I left Shawnee College, I went to work in Kentucky, and I was over there for about 40 some odd years. So I can't tell you and I know that at one point you ain't gonna get no being a black, you ain't gonna get no job here in town. You had to know somebody personally in that family that owned the business before they hired you. I can't think of any right now black businesses that I could tell you that other than restaurants. Now we had Baby May's Cafe down on Walnut, which is Martin Luther King now, and we went there because the pinball machine was there. So we went there to play pinball, me and Dennis and my buddies. And then there was Booker's Grill over here, a cafe on 23rd Street. And that was black owned. And we went there and we ate there. He had some of the best greasy hamburgers you can put in your mouth. So that was our number one place to go right there. But other than that, I can't think of any other. I may later, but I can't think of any other black businesses in town. Well, as an adult, since I was known by a lot of people in town, and I work with a lot of kids, and a lot of kids have become adults, and they have kids, and they respected me. I believe right now I can leave my doors open. I don't worry about anything. I haven't had anything miss in my yard or anybody take anything. But the community right now, since I know so many kids here and so many people here, I think they kind of put me up where I don't need to be on a pedestal because all I want to be is treated fairly, like I always said. Treat me fair, I treat you fair. I don't deserve anything special. But as far as being in town and getting along with everybody, and this everything has been really good as far as I'm concerned. Myself, I can't say everybody has the same experience, right. But I think what helped me in this community is being able to touch a lot of kids and work with a lot of kids over the last 35 years and play sports, and people know who I am. So a lot of these kids out here now that are adults, kids in their 20s, 30s, and so forth, they know who I am. If you say Harry Williams, the coach at the high school, they know me. Whether they know me personally or not, they know who I am because I've always tried to treat everybody fairly, and I let them all know that I'm not going to give you any special treatment I give this guy. It doesn't matter whether you're black, white, green, or I think it's what's fair is fair for everybody. So, and I try to stay with that. So, well, the changes really haven't impacted my family much. I'm going through the same thing everybody else is going through. As we lose businesses and everything else, you have to travel to get anything you need. That's one thing. The other thing is I tried to do what I could in the community to help our kids because I figured they needed the most help. But Cairo, as far as impacting me in any way at all, I had a pretty good life here in town. I don't know if everybody can say that, but I did some of the things I wanted to do because I wanted to make a difference in my community. And I worked with a lot of adults and kids over the last 30, 40 years. And I don't have any bad memories. I don't have anything that I can say that's negative, that I can really, that stands out. In other words, as far as the town and myself is concerned, I've done really well. I just hate the fact to where we're at. I don't like our city governments, the things that they've done to help the situation. I've been asked to run for mayor. I've been asked to be on the council, all these different things. But see, I guess I don't know if you'd call them stupid enough or smart enough to not get in the middle of a bunch of controversy to change my life because I'm doing pretty good. So why would I throw myself in the briar patch if I don't have to? Now I say if I can make a difference outside of that, that's what I always tried to do. Even today, the mayor comes by here and he sat down with me and said, "Man, what do you think? What do you think we do? You got any ideas? I can do this, I can do that. Give me some, pointers." And I said, "Well, look, the first thing I'm gonna let you know is we got to work together, all of us." I said, "Our biggest problem right now, everybody want to be a chief, nobody want to be an Indian." I said, "You can't have all chiefs. Somebody's got to step up and say, okay, your idea is a good idea. Let's do yours this time, maybe mine next time." We don't have that mentality in Cairo. What I see in this community is everybody trying to pull everybody else down. If they can't get up because they're too lazy or they can't get up because they're just having bad luck or whatever, they don't want you to get up either. And I'm saying, look, we have got to, am I right or wrong? I mean, if you live here in Cairo, you know what I'm saying. If you're doing something pretty good, they can't pat you on the back and say, "Hey, that's fantastic. I'm really happy for you." That's not the mentality we have here. I would love to change that. Because we can start to climb and get better in this community if we all help each other. It's like a crab, like that crab syndrome, And I said, how can we get away from that? Man, we can really go forward. The last mayor, one of the mayors used to live next door to me. He said, "I'm running for mayor, Harry. I want you to help me." And he said, "You vote for me." I said, "I'm going to vote for you." I said, "Because I know you want to build this community again." He said, "Yeah, we got to stop all this stuff. We got to stop stealing from this town." He got in there and nobody would work with him. He couldn't get anything done. They start scratching on his door. They threw by. Me and him put his furniture out on his front porch. They burned up his furniture on his front porch. Oh yeah, he had to walk around with his gun, and he was the mayor. And he had to walk around with his gun because people, and his wife both, because people were throwing stuff at the house, scratching on the doors, doing different things. And I told him, I said, "Paul, I'm your buddy." I said, "I want you to get out of this." I said, if I didn't care about you, I'd say, yeah, stay in there and fight with them. Man, it's not worth it for you to danger your family in this situation. It's just not. He said, well, I'm not going to let them win. I ain't getting out. I'm running again. I said, man, please, you don't understand. It goes a lot higher than Cairo anyway. And I said, let me give you a little advice. When the FBI comes here and you give them all the information they need, and they got all the names, and you've already shown me over $1.5 million that's disappeared with names, and they don't arrest anybody, this is way over your head, man. You got to get out of that. You got to just let them have it. But he didn't want to do it because he was so mad at what they did to him, that he wanted to fight the situation. I felt sorry for him, and I also was concerned about him, about their health and everything else, because I didn't want to see anything happen to him. But I'm not going to turn around and put myself in that situation when I know that there's people not going to work with me. If I want to do the right thing, I got to fight. I'm retired. What do I want to stay in this community and fight folks for when I'm retired? When you're retired, you want to ride off in the sunset. You know what I'm saying? You done your time. But I told him, I said, I'll do what I can for my community, but I'll do it for free. I don't want nobody to hire me. See, when I ran the program over there, the tennis program, I got all my tennis courts done. $60,000 worth of tennis courts done, redone. Fencing, nets, everything. We ran that program over there for over 12, 14 years. No problem whatsoever in this community. None. And the city was having Channel 12 and Channel 6, Channel 3 news coming to the city hall all the time because they was fighting. And they said, somebody said in the meeting one night, they said, well, let me ask you something. What's going on over them tennis courts? They don't never have no problem. They said, well, everybody over tennis courts working for free. Don't nobody get paid. See, I was the president, and I had a vice president, I had a secretary, and we ran that program over there. They already know, we don't get no money. We're just gonna keep this program going for the kids and the community. And we kept the courts up. They were always nice. I kept them, and I had guys from SIU come down here to played on these courts. And they said, your courts is better than the college courts. I said, well, I've got some help. And I'm not trying to brag on myself because I had people that I could go to that would help us. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't just me. It was other people on my committee that helped me do this. I couldn't have done it by myself. But I had enough people in the community, lawyers, the druggists, and all these different people that own businesses and all. They played tennis, and they said, hey, whatever you need, you let us know, and we'll do it. And I thought, man, but I just said, we're going to get these courts done. We're going to make sure everything's nice for the kids. I had the programs going. I gave free lessons on Saturday for the kids. I was trying to get as many black kids as I could to play tennis. But I couldn't just out say it.
Right.
So I'm saying, but that's what I really want. And a lot of them would come to me. So I started collecting tennis rackets from all my buddies and giving them to the kids that didn't have rackets. And I said, if you'll come play tennis now, I'll give you a racket. Oh, you will? Yeah. Yeah. You want a ball? Yeah. I'll give them balls. They start showing up. That's how I got some of the black kids on the tennis team.
We only got a couple more questions.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a patent on a tote rack that I built for those totes that you use for camping. Mm-hmm. And I built a rack for a guy back about 20 some odd years ago. And he was my supervisor. And he said, well, I went camping with that rack and they don't have them on the market anywhere. He said, you need to start making those racks. I said, I'm working right now. I don't need another job. He said, well, all the guys at camp, I had 5 of them, want you to make them. I said, look, let me tell you something. I'm not making a bunch of...
So he can look at
Oh. So I'm not making a bunch of racks. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. But he said, why don't you get a patent on it? I said, well, I don't know. I'll look at that later. So when I retired in 2016, I called him up. I said, you got anything on the market yet? He said, no, they don't. Because he has one of the biggest totes that they made at that time. And I told him, I said, okay, I'll make a rack. I think I'm going to just go ahead and see if I can get a patent on this rack. So I finally got some guys out of Miami, engineers. I got a patent on it, and but I didn't put it on the market. And this is what this room was for. When I built this room, this was going to be my patent room to build those racks, so I could start getting them out on the market and sell them and all that. And I found me a manufacturer to get them manufactured, and it was so nice. I said, I think I'll put the band in here. So my wife said, well, what about the racks? And I said, well, I'm going to put them back in my shop I got a shop over here. So I'll put them back in my shop. I said, this room's too nice. I'm gonna put my band in here because we was in the basement practicing in the basement. But I put them in this room when I got it all done instead of having this was my rack room. Then I built a a golf cabinet, and it's in the garage out there. I started making those for different guys. They said, "Man, you need to get a patent on that." I said, "Well, these things take so much." I said, "I'd have to get employees, and I'd have to get a business going. I got to get a building. I'll have taxes. I'll have insurance to pay for the people that are working for me." I said, I'm really being retired. I don't want to go through all that." They said, "Well, you need to." My wife says, "Just get your pattern and sell the pattern online. 6, 8, $10. People will buy a pattern for $10." I said, "That's not a bad idea." But I had quite a few of the guys I made those cabinets for. You just set your golf bags in them, got shelves in it, got a little storage cabinet, coat and cap rack on the side made out of golf balls, and it rolls around. I got it all sealed up, put carpet in the bottom of it so you can put it in your garage, you put it in your house, wherever you want to put it, And so
So you're kind of an inventor as well.
yeah, my financial advisor told me, he said, "Boy, you can do a lot of stuff." I said, "Well, I always been told by my father-in-law, don't let anybody do anything you can do yourself. Do it yourself." And when I got ready to put that roof on, I said, "Let's hire the boys who does roof." I said, "I don't do no roof." He said, "Yeah, but we're gonna be able to do it. Me and you. Come on." I said, "Well, that's a lot of roof up there." He said, "Yeah, you got a vacation?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I got one. Let's do it." Well, he wouldn't let me hire nobody. Well, he kept making me work with my hands, and I finally I did woodworking in high school, and I loved it, but I didn't really do anything with it as far as making anything to sell or anything. It's just stuff I had to do as a grade, but I did like woodworking. So I hung these doors. I did all the work in here. I'm an electrician, so I did all my lighting, run all my wires, put my box in, all that. I got solar panels up on my house. I put my own solar system in. Everybody come over, "Hey, who put your system?" I said, "I did." "You put your own solar in?" I said, "Oh, yeah, you can do it. I'll show you how. You can do it." Oh, man. So anyway, I just so used to working with my hands, and I had an old crate from work, and I brought it home. I put my wheels on it, and I put stuff on it and get it fixed up. Different little stuff like that I like doing because it don't take a whole lot, but people think it really takes a lot. Once you start working in it and dabbling in it here and there, you can. I have guys come all the time to the house and say, "Hey, man, you got this. Can you build me this? Can you build?" "Yeah, yeah, I'm building for you." I said, "Don't get no hurry now. Because, I don't work by the hour no more." "Oh, no, just whenever you get ready." I said, "All right." Well, I'll build it for them. They come pick it up. And I don't owe you nothing. Get on down the road. The things that were important to me as I was growing up, one of them was the barbecue pit. Because that's where all the hangout was. We all went to eat after we got through playing football, and we'd hit the pit and get us one of them burger baskets. Man, they had the best burger baskets in the world. We still talk about that. The other place was with the water burger. They call it water burger, but it was what a burger is what the name of the place was, and it was north of town. They had fries about that long, handmade cut. Burgers was outstanding. I can still taste them burgers. Those are that place. Then we had what they call the hamburger wagon downtown. It was an old T model car, what do you call it, automobile, Model T, and they had a flat grill in there. Man, that dude would make them burgers. And I can remember Mama carrying me down there for Christmas, and it'd be 3 or 4 deep on the sidewalks, and but you could smell that wagon 2 blocks over. Man, we couldn't afford them all the time, but every once in a while she'd be able to get me one of them burgers. Ooh, man, I could still smell them burgers. The other thing is, if you talk to anybody in Cairo, has been to Cairo for years and years, ask them about the hot tamale man out in front of Rex Packaged Liquor. He had a little old hot tamale wagon about that big with a handle on the back of it and wheels on it, and he come out there every day in the afternoon, and he popped that top, start selling them hot tamales, melt in your mouth. Those were fantastic. Let's see. There was.
What about landmarks?
Well, library. Me and Dennis, we used to go to the library. I'll tell you a story about the library. That was back when they had the colored fountain and the white fountain. So we go in the library, and we always did want to drink out of that white fountain because they said we couldn't. You know what I'm saying? You don't drink out of that one now because it's right marked right over top. So Dennis says, "Hey, Harry, I'm going to drink out of that fountain." I said, man, we ain't supposed to drink out here. I know it, but if you'll watch for the librarian, I said, okay. So I went up there and I said, go ahead and go. He jumped up there and he got him a drink. I ran over and I looked at him and he's wiping his mouth out and looking at me and I was looking at him all over thinking, well, how, how was it? He said, I don't know. He said, you get a drink. I said, well, go watch for it. He took off. I jumped up there and I got me a drink. I jumped back down. Now, they had little stools for us because we were little guys, to get the drink. So I jumped down. He looking me all over like I was going to, grow tall or fall. And he said, what do you think? I said, man, I can't tell no different. Well, I don't know. I guess we was about 7, 8 years old or so. We turned about 20, 21. We realized that both of them was piped up to the same water. It wasn't no different in the water. But when somebody you have to drink out of this one and you will only drink out of that one. See what I'm saying? You as kids, you think, well, I'm missing something here. I got to get a little of it. Well, that was one of the funniest things I could remember about that, about the library, because we used to go up there all the time. That was one of the landmarks we used to like to go to. Other than that, let's see, the Cavalier Club was one of the clubs, the black clubs that we went to, and it was black owned, the Cavalier Club, and I said it was some of the business I couldn't remember. But as a band, we played at the Cavalier Club. They hired us quite a bit. The Pythian Club was down on 13th Street. It was a black club that all the blacks went to. Those are two of the clubs in town that our band was able to play, and the people would all come in. That's when we packed the house. So yeah, those are really good places that we played. Let's see, I can't think of any other than as a kid. Well, I can remember getting into the metal building, metal doors down at the river. It was a tunnel. Well, some people came through one time and they said we was doing some historical things on Cairo, and somebody sent them up to my house and said Harry had been in the tunnel down there where they used to hold the slaves, and wanted to know what I saw. So they come up there and they said, well, we understand that you got in the tunnel where they said they say you knew they had slaves in there and all that. I said, no, ma'am. I don't know about no slaves. She said, well, they say you got in the tunnel. I said, I did. Well, what'd you see? I said, well, I saw chains hanging on the wall. They said, you did. I said, well, is that where they used to hold the slaves? And I said, no, look, I don't know anything about that. See, the police run us out, but my buddy was holding the doors and said, man, you want to go down? I said, everybody said, no. I said, well, I'll go. I said, but hold them doors open so I can see, because it's dark. So they holding the door. I got down there far enough where I could see chains hanging on the wall. It was too dark to see back in there. But they said, well, what did you see? I said, all I saw was chains on the wall. There was no slaves hanging on them chains or nothing. That's all I'm telling y'all is I saw chains on the wall. That's it. Well, they're saying the whole thing is that possibly they held slaves in there, and all that. And I said, now look, here's what I was told by a gentleman that I kind of respected. And he was an older guy in his 80s. He said, we used to keep produce in there. When they ship it up the river back then, there was no refrigeration. Right. So that's where they kept it cool on the ground until they could distribute it to all the stores in town. There was lots of stores in town. That's what they used that for. Well, off the record, I find out they also were smuggling slaves up this way, and they had holding areas for them to stay, where they would keep them safe until they can get them north. And somebody said that was possible, one of the places. I said, I don't know anything about that. I really don't. But they're saying that I knew that they had slaves. I don't know that. All I saw, but since then they welded all that down. They locked down because they kept telling us they don't want us in it. Don't go back in and all that. They welded those doors shut. Now they have opened them back up not long ago, and they found out that all the little doors out on the front of this side of the hill, they said those were all compartments going into that tunnel. Used to be tunnels all under town. I didn't know that, But I can't tell you what they were used for, but I do know that they do exist. And I told them, I said, now, if I was the city council, I would use as much as that I can to generate as much revenue as I can for this city. Because people would love to come in there if they thought slaves were in there to look at it. They'd probably pay to look at it. Not only that, we did a concert for the Toll House down there. The General Grant, they got that museum, the Grant Museum, had all his stuff in there and the whole works. They used to lay their artillery down there at the point. And they told me, the volunteers said, man, we don't have toilet paper, we ain't got nothing. I said, well, I'll have our band play for you guys, to benefit. And we raised a bunch of money for them and for the Toll House. And they let it go down. And they spent $1 million they said on the whole building. Getting it all ready and renovated and whole works, and they just let it go. So, I mean, there's a lot of things I think that this town could have benefited from. I said, nothing else, put some Mississippi mud in a bottle and sell it for 50 cents. We have so much stuff here. We're so rich in history that people would love to come here if we had someone who could talk about the history of this city and all the different positive things they can put together, because they come from Canada and everywhere else to watch those two rivers go together.
Right.
I see them sitting down there all the time. And I said, if they'll do that, they'll buy 50 cents worth of Mississippi mud or whatever. Tell them how much what's that costing us? I told Vernon, I said, you guys need to use your head and start using the stuff around us. Nobody has the energy to want to do it. So, that's why one of them said, man, you need to run. I said, no, I'm not going to go in there fighting. I'll help. Call me and I'll do it for free. When they want the pumps put up down there, I said, okay, call me. The mayor said, you want to help me? I said, yeah. Went down there and said, well, I owe you guys. So you don't owe me nothing. I told you to call me and I'll help this city any way I can, but you can't hire me because I said, I don't want to be in the middle of a bunch of stuff. So I've helped him put the gates up. I've helped him put pumps in, stuff like that. And he'd call me and I'd do it. I just filled some holes over here across town not long ago. My buddy said, man, we got holes in front of the house for a year and a half. I said, I know where there's some chat. I'll go get it. And I filled the holes up with chat for him. And I called the mayor. I said, well, look here, man, down the street from you. I said, those guys had holes in their street, right down the street from you. I said, can you get those holes filled up? Oh, well, yeah, Harry, we ain't got any asphalt right now. We just think we don't have any money. And I said, look, man, can you put something? He said, well, I got maybe some chat. I said, yeah, I know where there's some at. I said, out the dump. I said, won't you go get some of that? He said, well, I'll try to get to it. A week later, I went by there. I'm talking hole this deep, this big around. 2 or 3 of them in the road. He has to go back out his driveway and go around them to keep them falling off in them. So I went over and got buckets and I filled them. I called the mayor and said, look, I filled those holes up. I said, they're good. Man, Harry, if I had about 5 or 6, 7 people around here doing the same thing, helping out, boy, no telling how far this town go. I said, look, man, you paying guys right now. They're sitting down there at the city hall. They're sitting at the garage. They can fill them holes up. Well, I ain't got not a lot of help though. I said, all right. See, but landmarks around here, that's not I know back years ago, those are some of the places that I was able to partake in. It was, how much time you got? Because I'll tell you what, I've been here now for 70 years. I've seen a lot of change, and most of it's for the bad. But my hopes has always been up that we're going to come back. That's why I'm still here. I could have left. But talking to my father-in-law, and he was one of the guys that was right here with me the whole time, helped me anything I wanted to do, and I called on him for anything. He said, I asked him, I said, you want to move? We'll just go together. And he was up in age, 80s, and I told we lost our mother-in-law, so I told my wife, I said, we need to stay and take care of him. I said, I'd like to leave this city because I don't think anything's going to happen. And I said, but I don't think he'll go with us. She said, yeah, we've already asked us, all us girls, his 3 girls, my wife and their 2 sisters. He ain't going with us nowhere. So I went over and sat down with him one day and I said, you want to go with me? I said, we'll leave here. He said, where we going? I said, you'll go with me? He said, yeah, where we going? I said, well, how about Tennessee? I said, I believe we can find a place there. And he said, well, that's fine. He said, can I take my animals? I said, yeah, take your little dog and all that. Your cat, we'll take them. He said, well, let me ask you something. I said, what's that? He said, where can you go in this country any better than the Midwest? I sat there a minute and I thought, fires out west, earthquakes, different storms coming in on the south, going out the east coast, cold as heck up north. I said, you know what? You're right. I believe I better stay right here. He said, I can't think of any place any better than the Midwest here. So, as far as changes here in this city, the only changes I like to see right now, and I think that could really help us, is we got to get people that want to see this place grow. If we can get some leaders in this town that can put the town before everything else, I think we can start uphill. We've been sliding downhill so many years now. I thought about 10 years ago we was at the bottom until we lost the grocery store and gas stations. And I thought, I just thought we was as low as we can go. I didn't realize we can go even lower. We're in the basement now. So we don't have any place to go but up. But it's going to be all of us collectively, or we're going to have a new generation come in with no agenda that can look at this town and say, my heart's right here and we want to do the right thing. And we got to get enough people on board to do the right thing to make this city. We still got everything here that we need. It'll take a little while. I won't ever see it, but it can grow. And I have hopes that we can come back. That's why I'm still here.
If you had to describe Cairo in one sentence, what would it be?
If I had to describe Cairo in one sentence, really,
What is Cairo?
Cairo is my hometown. I mean, that's all I can tell you. And look, I don't care where you go in the world, it ain't like home. Even it may not be much, but it's yours. You know what I'm saying? This is, I look at it like I can go a lot of beautiful places, Hawaii, all these, but it ain't home. See? So my heart's here. That's why I'm still here. And if I had to describe this place, Carroll's my hometown. I have talked about so much today. I've run her camera down. And I don't know if you can use over half of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But, it's just the stories that, that I've gone through in my life, being around this area. I've enjoyed all my kids. I have lots of kids come back and talk to me, bring their kids. And that's why I did it. I did it not because I'm going to get a reward, a pay out of it. It's the fact that when my kids come back and bring their kids and say, this is my coach, and I can look at that kid's face and I can say, you have one fantastic daddy. He played for me. He's one of the best players ever. And when he walked off and he said, thanks, coach, and shake my hand, and his kid smiled and he's smiling, that's what my reward's all about. If somebody can come back here and done well in life, have their own families, and can see me with their kids, that's what my reward is. And I had that happen quite a few times with different kids. Even Tyrone, when he went off and made $10 million with the Clippers, he came by the house one day and he said, Coach, what I owe you? I said, well, here's what you owe me. I want you to come back here and help one kid and tell him when he's successful, come back here and help another kid. Let's get a chain of kids coming out of here, one helping the other. That's what you owe me. Oh, okay, coach, I can do that. So that's all I want. I want you to help somebody else. Well, I hope I didn't give you too much crap. I mean, I just know that
This is great.
I've had a really good life here and I've done fairly well. When I look back on it, I'm pretty comfortable. I just try to help anybody I can. And all my neighbors know that now because when I moved in, they were all couples around me. They were all older. They lost their husbands and all. I had 5 widow women around me. Every day I'd come home from work, one of them would call and says, Deanie, could you send Harry over? I've got this going on. Deanie, can you send Harry? I've got that. So I had each one of them that I had to go to their houses and say, what you got going on? Or, I can't get that light come on. I said, yes, ma'am, I'll get it for you. And I'll fix your light. Or I can't open this jar of peanut butter or whatever. I'd open it up for her. One had a bird in the house. I had to get the blanket and chase that bird all over the house. I got that bird out of there. She was sitting out on the porch, Miss Decker, 86 years old. I came home and I pulled up her and I said, Miss Decker, what's the matter? She said, well, honey, she said, my air conditioner's out and it's on a Friday and they said they won't be here till Monday and it's hot in the house. And I said, can I look at it? And she said, oh yeah, if you want to, you got time. I said, yes, ma'am. So I go in there and I look everything over and I go to the box and I check a fuse box. And she's got those round old fuses. I said, you got any of these right here. And she said, up on that refrigerator, honey, I think. I got them out and I put a fuse in. And I said, okay, turn it on, Miss Decker. And she did. And that thing kicked on, started. She said, oh, my goodness. She said, how much I owe you? I said, well, what you owe me is the next time that thing goes out, don't you call nobody. You call me. I said, I'll look at it first. Well, the other lady was 89 and she was a millionaire. Didn't matter. But she said, Harry said, I've got my arrangement out in my yard is falling apart. Can you look at it? I said, yes, ma'am, I'll be down in a minute. So I went down there and all it took is a couple screws or so, and I put it all back together and took it back down. How much I owe you? I said, you don't owe me nothing. I said, that wasn't nice. She said, well, the last guy, I paid him $70 to fix it for me. I said, he's the one put them screws in there? She said, well, I don't know, but he fixed it for me. And I thought, man, because she got money, you're going to do that to an old lady? I said, well, next time, don't call him, call me. Well, one had a snake in the yard. Honey, go over because Miss Watson got a snake over. I said, I'm the wrong guy for that job. I can't go get that. She said it's pretty big. Well, I thought, man, she said, well, just go over and see what you can do. And I said, man, a snake? She said, yeah. So I go over and she's standing in the door. She said, Harry said, he's right over there by those weeds, those bushes there. Said, he's as big as my arm. I thought, oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. I said, yes, ma'am. I'm looking. I got my bucket now because I ain't grabbing no snake. And I got my rake. And I'm looking around. And I can't find that snake. I thought, man, where is that snake? I said, I got to get her because she ain't going to be able to sleep. I don't get that snake. Now I'm looking. So Dina, my wife, comes down. She says, you get him? I said, no, I ain't got him yet. He's got to be under all this, those shrubs and all that stuff. And we down, both of us down there looking for this snake. She's all bent over. Now she tell me she ain't scared of snake. That's why she want me to come get him. But she ain't scared of him. I said, okay, well. So she's bent over and I'm bent over. We're looking for the snake. And this tree was hanging over her back. Well, I grabbed that tree and I went on her back. She did a Michael Jackson moonwalk all the way out to the street. She didn't even touch the ground. I thought that was impressive. I said, wow. She looked at me and she was talking, nothing coming out. She's going. And I thought, uh-oh, I done messed up supper. I thought, man, I said, look, wait a minute. Hold on. She said, don't you do that. You don't do that. And she started crying. I thought, look, I was just kidding with you. I said, she said, you don't do that. She said, you scared. I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She took off, went to the house. I thought, man, do I keep looking for this snake? Or do I go home and continue to apologize? Because I ain't going to get no supper this evening. But I was taking care of all of them. I think all of them are gone now except, I think they're all gone. Yeah, they're all gone. 3 of them died and one of them moved off with her family. But yeah, that's what happened after I was accepted in the neighborhood. Then, the people, and they started calling me, and I didn't mind it because I had a lot of skills that I thought if God gave them to me, I should share them with everybody else. Otherwise he could have given them to anybody. So that's why I tell all my buddies, I said, man, look, man, you don't know how much money you save yourself doing all this stuff. I said, well, thing about it is, I said, I'll help you any way I can. Just let me know what you need. And I said, he didn't want me to take my skills and keep them to myself, So I try to share them with anybody and everybody can,